I would like to speak about Revelation chapter 4. A few words that I have in my mind. Number one, worship. Number two, things that are taking place on the earth, including the coronavirus. And other things, whatever you see on the earth. Number three is the throne in heaven. Before we get into Revelation 4, I would like to mention a few statements about Revelation 5 and 6 to 18. What do you see in Revelation 5? What is the theme of chapter 5 of Revelation? Take some time to read about it. You would come to this theme that there is a slain lamb, and he is the only one that is qualified to open the scrolls of the book. What are these scrolls of the book? They are the judgments of God upon the evil on the earth. There is none that is qualified to execute this judgment except Christ. And then you see the judgments that are happening from chapter 6 to 18. My point is this. If I only see Revelation 6 to 18, what are happening there, and if I don't see Revelation 4 and 5, I may not understand why the things that are happening in the way they are happening and who is the reason for it. The beautiful point about Revelation chapter 6 up to 18, the word church is not even mentioned once. The reason is the grace of God. The church is not subject to the wrath of God. The church would be raptured before the tribulation period. So these are a couple of statements about Revelation chapter 5 and 6 to 18. So now let's come to Revelation chapter 4. Do you have the Bible in your hand, and you can refer with this video and see Revelation 4. And what are the things that you see in Revelation 4? There are three things. Number one, the throne in heaven, in verses 2 and 3. The one who is seated on the throne in heaven. There is a rainbow around the throne. What do you think about the rainbow? When I say rainbow, what comes to your mind? Don't you think of the covenant that God made with Noah? Right? In Genesis chapter 9. Does that not refer to the faithfulness of God? I know there are so many things that are taking place on the earth. Media is talking about it a lot. But do I see a throne in heaven? Yes. But do I see the one that is seated on the throne in heaven to be a faithful one for me? Faithful is the one who called you. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Apostle Paul speaks about it, and he will do it. The throne in heaven is faithful to us, faithful to the finished work of Jesus Christ. So that's the first thing that we get to see, the throne in heaven and the faithfulness of God. And there is one that is seated on the throne. By the way, this throne is not established today or yesterday. It is from everlasting to everlasting. In Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 12. So the second thing that we see in Revelation 4, verses 6 to 9, there are four living creatures. Who are they? All I know about them, based on the scripture, they are specific kind of angels. They have 6 wings. Isaiah saw angels with 6 wings in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2. They were so occupied with the holiness of God. They were singing a song about the holiness of God in Isaiah chapter 6. And Ezekiel mentions in Ezekiel chapter 1, and also he talks about it in Ezekiel chapter 10. The 4 living creatures, the description of it. I believe in Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 12 to 20, they are in constant movement. Why are they constantly moving around the throne? What are they occupied with? They are occupied with worshiping the Lord. They are occupied with the holiness of God. Their duties are mentioned, their purposes are mentioned in Revelation 5, 6 to 14. What do they do in Revelation 5, 6 to 14? They worship the slain lamb. That's all that they do. That's the same thing that they do to the Father who is seated on the throne in Revelation 4, 6 to 9. They are occupied with the worship of God. Sometimes we can be taken away from it if we only focus on the things on the earth. Fear can be replaced in place of worship. If I only see the things on the earth, and I may forget the faithful one who is seated on the throne in Revelation 4. That's all I need to do. So Apostle Paul says, set your minds on the things above. Colossians chapter 3, verse 1. We do not belong to this. We are not of the world. Our citizenship is in heaven. Philippians chapter 3, verse 20. And the third thing in Revelation chapter 4, what we see is 24 other thrones and the 24 elders related to that in Revelation chapter 4, verse 4. They have white garments. That speaks about the righteousness of God. We have the righteousness of God as a gift by faith. Can you believe it? Romans 5. And then these 24 elders have crowns on their head, golden ones. What I love about the word crown in Greek language, there in Revelation chapter 4, verse 4, is Stephanos, the word for crown. This crown specifically refers to a reward. Apostle Paul speaks about Stephanos in 1 Corinthians 9:25 as a reward. And then he mentions in 2 Timothy 4, verse 8, there is a crown, Stephanos, laid up for me in heaven, the crown of righteousness. Not just for me, anyone that loves the appearing of Christ. You and I have that crown by grace of God. What would you like to what would you like to do with a golden crown on your head before the throne of God? Before God. You want to lay them at the feet of God. That's what these 24 elders did in Revelation 4, verse 10. That's the act of worship that I want to talk about it. Pastor Shibali mentioned once, giving back to God what God has given is the true form of worship. He quoted this verse, Genesis 22, verse 5. Abraham gave Isaac back. And when he wanted to offer Isaac in Genesis 22, verse 5, and he mentioned to his young men, saying that I will worship the Lord and come back. Giving back to God what God has given is the true form of worship. It's amazing, right? Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Apostle Paul is urging us by the mercies of God to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. And he says it is a true form of worship. And he says in verse 2, let's not be patterned according to the way the world thinks, in fear. But let's be renewed in our mind. Let's get occupied with the throne of God. Let's worship God. Amen. Thank you so much.